Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of SHEMAKERS, where we have conversations to help women win in business and life. I am Shavonna Williams, your hostess and the founder and CEO of Heels and Helmets. I've worked in sports for over 20 years and have had experiences with 5 major sports leagues. So, of course, I've been in a few boardrooms where I was the only woman. At Heels and Helmets, I am working to change that. My mission is to get more women in the boardroom with equal pay. Throughout my career, I've been fortunate enough to work with some incredible women who are not only talented and killing the game, but share my passion to help you succeed. These women, SHEMAKERS, will come on each week to have conversations with all of us to help you develop your winning game plan. Let's meet tonight's SHEMAKER. Gail Dent is the Associate Director, Communications at the Ncaa, where she works with national media and focuses on communications surrounding Ncaa issues and programs. Her expertise is in strategic planning for public relations, diversity and inclusion communications, corporate communications, reputation management, and crisis communications. She is also an adjunct professor in higher education who teaches in person and virtually, sharing her experiences in communications. Previously, she worked for the U.S. Olympic Committee and the Athletics Communications Department at the University of Kentucky, where she earned a master's degree in sports administration. SHEMAKERS, I had the opportunity to meet Gail Dent working on Final Four 2009 in Detroit, Michigan. She is a phenomenal woman, and I'm so glad that she had some time to join us this evening. As you know, we're closing out February, so that means we're getting ready to march into the madness of NCAA men's basketball tournament and championship. So I am grateful to have Gail Dent with us tonight. Open up your playbooks right now. You're going to want to take notes because she is going to definitely help you develop your playbook for communications, working in sports, college athletics, managing events, and more. So SHEMAKERS, let's welcome Gail Dent.
Hello.
Good evening, Gail. It's so nice to see you. Thank you for joining us on SHEMAKERS.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
You are welcome. So much for us to talk about. I'm excited to first catch up with you.
Yes, it's great. It's wonderful.
It has been a whirlwind of a year. You know, this pandemic hit right at the beginning of the tournament. Tell us what that was like at the last minute, just changing all of these plans. I know that you all spend at least 3 years working on Final Four and then had to pivot quickly last year.
Yes, well, like I, jokingly tell people, the madness starts well before March. March Madness is wonderful. It is the one month of the year when people really focus on college athletes and our championships, our men's and women's basketball championships, and we have others going on as well. We do 90 championships a year. People don't realize that, but March is really where people focus on basketball and what's happening at NCAA. So, to your question, last year was extremely different, and it was not a good feeling because we ended up having to, not have the tournament. That's where we ended up. We did it for the right reasons, which was the health and safety of our student athletes, as well as our coaches and the fans too. People tend to forget about the fan base coming to our tournaments and things along that line in numerous cities. So it wasn't a good feeling. Many of us were very sad because we knew that student athletes were feeling very bad because, you get ready all year. In November, the season starts with basketball, and you are playing for March. And then all of a sudden, it's like the rug is pulled from out under you. And, I've had conversations with individuals. It was the strangest feeling because we were here in Indianapolis and there was a tournament, the Big Ten tournament that was going on. And they were pulling athletes off of the court. And we were still having conversations. We knew what was happening in the country, nationally, with the virus. Nobody knew the extent of the virus, what would eventually happen. But long story short, we ended up canceling both men's and women's basketball tournaments. Now, the upside is we have our fingers crossed for this year. The men are in Indianapolis. We're bringing all of the teams here, and all of the women's teams will go to San Antonio. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that we can have both tournaments. Everybody will come in, be safe, we'll get back home safe, and March Madness will continue.
Yes, I am keeping my fingers crossed as well. One thing I did not realize until I had the opportunity to work with you all in the Final Four is that the men's basketball tournament is actually the largest basketball event in the world, surpassing the Olympics. And that was really interesting to me because it features all American college student athletes. Was that something that was unique, a unique learning for you as well?
That is a unique statistic that you have there. We always look at the tournament. I'm a little biased because I love basketball. I love March Madness. So I always knew it was something unique, something special. You look at the student athletes and their faces when they make a Final Four and they're coming into the Final Four city. And I'll never forget some of the looks when they walk into the hotel, their Final Four hotel. And we might have pictures of them up on the walls. We really go all out with marketing, the Ncaa marketing staff. We have things that are branded, the imagery, and they love that. So I'm not surprised that the fan base, the national public, and the international public loves March Madness and everything that happens with basketball. When I look at our numbers, the broadcast numbers here in the United States, and then it's also broadcast overseas too, it's amazing. So that statistic really doesn't surprise me, but I always love hearing when people talk about the tournament and the broad attention that it gets. And, we take it for granted because we work with it year in and year out, but I love hearing how fans love it. And, the numbers continue to go up.
Yes. What are some of the challenges in working with international media?
It's interesting because before I was with the NCAA, I was with the U.S. Olympic Committee. So that was a huge benefit for me, being able to work not only nationally, but internationally. And I would say there aren't that many differences really working with international media. Sometimes you have to slow down with what you're saying for the translation. Sometimes, especially with, I would say, March Madness, they don't always understand some of the slang or some of the branding that we have around things. So you have to explain it. I can remember being overseas one time and we were talking about basketball, and I'm from Kentucky, the state of Kentucky. So, I said, basketball reigns supreme in Kentucky. and March Madness and and they were thinking, March Madness, how does that do? Are people going out of their mind in March? No, not that type of madness, but the March Madness of the tournament. So sometimes you have to explain a little bit more with the international media reps, but once they catch on, they have it and they love it. So with our men's basketball tournament, the numbers keep growing. We have the tournament broadcast in numerous countries. I see that press release every year, and I'm astonished at how vast this tournament continues to grow and just everything that's mixed with it. And the key thing, though, Shavanya, is it's exposure for our student athletes and what they're doing. So, I love seeing everything that the tournament brings with it, but it's really great exposure for the athletes, and it gives us an opportunity. We have the benefit of being able to communicate a little bit more about them. People see them putting a ball in a hoop, but they also get the stories of how they've grown up, their lives, what's gotten them to college, what they want to do after college, community service. So that's something that, people take for granted, I think, here in the United States. But again, when you go overseas or people are looking at things from a foreign perspective, those are things that they don't always know that student athletes do. So we enjoy sharing those stories any which way that we can.
So you grew up in Kentucky, and that is definitely where basketball is king.
It is king and queen. We have a lot of great female basketball players who have come through there. And yes, Kentucky is known for its basketball and rivalries. Many times people think of the horses with the Kentucky Derby, and that's also another good event. But basketball is it in Kentucky. There's some little children that, barely can walk, and they're given a basketball as their first gift. So, it's fabulous. And it's really neat to see the fans and the rivalries and how excited people get around March, but even throughout the year with basketball. I can remember when I was working at Kentucky, and we had Midnight Madness. And, that's when all the fans would come through to see the men's and women's basketball team. And that is a phenomenal event. Most places, if they hold something like that, they might draw, maybe 100, a couple of hundred. Kentucky drew thousands. So again, it's fabulous to see the fan base, and then when the fans, their team makes it to the tournament, they just go crazy. It's great. And then a Final Four, oh my gosh. People travel. So yeah, it's a great experience, unique, and I enjoy all of it.
Was it that community energy that sparked your interest in working in sports?
I've always loved being involved in communities where I've moved, getting involved with whatever the issue is in the community, what's going on. I did a little bit of community relations when I was back home in Kentucky, but honestly, I grew up in a sports family, and my dad loved sports. My mom loved sports. We were never competitive athletes. Now, my dad played a little bit of tennis and was pretty good at it. I can remember him telling me the story about in his younger days, he was playing in some tournament and earned the key to Louisville the key to the city. So yeah, playing tennis at a young age, minority male, African American male. But we always loved sports in my household. And I can remember, surprisingly, being from Kentucky, we watched more football than we did basketball. And that was where my initial love for the sport began. And getting into sports, we would watch football on Sundays, and my dad would be in his big chair, and I'd have a little chair right beside his, and that would be daddy daughter time, surprisingly. Daddy daughter time around Sunday football, and there usually would be two televisions in the living room, and we would watch football. So initially, I wanted to be in with football, professional football, the NFL. But as I went to school and got education and learned a little bit more, I started to broaden my thought process, and it got me to where I am right now. But it wasn't so much community, but it was more the upbringing around sports and just love for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and seeing a way to connect.
Seeing a way to connect. Yeah.
I understand that way before LinkedIn, way before there was Google to research other people working in sports, you read an article about a gentleman who was working and consulting the NFL on diversity.
Yes.
And you wrote a letter to Mr. David Cromwell, and that letter ignited your career in sports. Share with us what made you think to write a letter to him at that time and what you hope to accomplish from it.
Well, it's such an interesting situation, a story that I tell students when I talk to them, or maybe even student athletes. And the whole theme of it is persevere and be determined and be persistent, and don't give up and apply for things. So yes, I wanted to be in football, work for the NFL. I had gotten a little bit of work experience when I was in college. I had volunteered with the Sports Information Office, also volunteered with the university's public relations office. So that gave me experience working around media, around athletes, around faculty, professors, sports and non-sports. So I was sending my resume out to NFL teams. Unfortunately, I was getting rejection letters back. And I decided, okay, I'm going to go work in the healthcare industry in Louisville after I graduated. And it was actually in customer service, which I didn't realize would be a benefit back then to now in public relations. Having people come to you with their problems, solving their problems, and then sending them on their way. So I was sitting at home one evening. I had gotten into the healthcare industry, and I was thumbing through a magazine, and I saw that this gentleman had been hired by the NFL to study hiring patterns in football. So he is looking at more women getting involved in football, people of color, and then just looking at the hiring practices overall for the league and for specific teams. So, as you mentioned, I said I am going to send him a cold call letter. And like you mentioned, we didn't have all of the digital capabilities back then that we have now. And just long story short, I sent him the letter. I thought he would, just drop everything that he was doing once he got it through the US mail system and reply back to me and, oh, I have a job for you. Didn't quite happen that way. And I waited probably about a good 2 months before I got a reply from him. And, I thought at that point, I wasn't going to be involved in sports. And, one evening, again, I was sitting at home and the telephone rings and, pick up the phone and it's him. And he tells me, unfortunately, he didn't have anything for someone with my level of experience with the NFL offices or with any teams that he knew about. However, he knew about a position at the University of Kentucky in sports information. And we talked about it, and I said, oh, I had seen the position advertised. They were looking for somebody with 3 years of experience, and I knew I didn't have 3 years of experience. But he was looking at my information, and he said, you have enough to get your foot in the door. I'm looking at your resume right here. I think you've got enough to get your foot in the door if you're interested in the position. He said, think about it. Maybe you apply, you get the position, and then you can come back to the NFL, maybe, 2 or 3 years later. So as he talked to me, I thought, and I said, it does make sense. You have to think broader. You can't be siloed. So I reapplied, sent the letter to him, my resume, and he sent a letter of recommendation to Kentucky. Either he did it or Commissioner Rozelle did it. He said one of the two would do it. And I never found out who did it, but they did it. And Kentucky called me and about 3 weeks later offered me the position. They were still interviewing people at that time. So there were others that were being interviewed. But they looked at me and what I offered, and yeah, I got the position, and that's what started the whirlwind of being in sports.
And what did you learn from that experience of, one, being a go-getter and making that cold call, but secondly, Gail, looking at yourself and seeing talent that you didn't think you had at that moment?
Right. It was the conversation with David that really made the difference. And what he made me focus on was broadening my outlook, because I was just looking at one particular league, one particular sport. In fact, I was only looking at warm weathered NFL teams. I wasn't even thinking about the cold weathered team. So again, you have to broaden your perspective. What I tell students after I tell them that story also is, as you open up your mind, if there is a position that you are interested in, apply. Apply for the position. Now, don't come out of school applying for the CEO position, be realistic. But if there's something that you're interested in, apply for the job. Something that has been researched and found that we don't do as women is, we may not apply for a position. We will look at a job, see 10 qualifications, and if we don't check the box for all 10 or even 9 of the 10, we won't apply. Men they don't do that. They may see the qualifications and they may only be able to check 3 boxes. They still apply. Yeah, they still apply for the job. And the point is, go ahead and apply. You never know what might happen. And I also tell students, open your minds. Open your minds as you're coming out of school. Don't be so siloed. You may not get that perfect position straight out of college. It may take you a while to get to whatever, quote, you define perfect as. It may take you a little while. And then the third point that I leave with them through that story is, wherever you land, do a good job. Sports is a very small world, and people know people. So do a good job wherever you are, because what I found is when I went to Kentucky to interview for the position, they had already spoken with the person that I worked with in college. They'd already spoken because they knew him from the industry. And he had already given me glowing remarks. But imagine if I hadn't done well. If I hadn't done well, Kentucky never would have called, and I never would have known that I possibly could have had that opportunity. So sports is a small world. People talk, people know about you before you even get your foot in the door, especially with where we are right now in communications with social media. People can research. So yeah, do a good job wherever you are, and bring your best self to a job.
When you think about all of the spokes of sports, why is communications and public relations so important in this industry?
Because it gives you the opportunity to tell your own story. I mean, communications is extremely important, especially right now. I mean, look at where we are. We are physically distanced from each other, but yet we still find a way to communicate. We're doing things digitally, we're doing things virtually. All of that's communications. So we talk about the importance of technology. We talk about the rise of health administration. We talk about other fields that are really important, and they still are. But communications is right there. We just don't talk about it as much. And that's the irony. We don't talk about talking. We don't talk about communications. But, the rise right now, and you look at social media, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Instagrams, Zoom, all of these are communication platforms. Microsoft Teams. A year ago, many people may not have even known what Zoom was, let alone using it. But you better bet right now they know what it is. That's a major communications platform. And it's being used in marketing. It's being used in all types of messaging. It's being used politically. We've seen political figures on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. So communications and public relations is very important right now. I can't stress that enough. Yeah.
And what are some of the essential skills students or young professionals in public relations need to focus on developing?
Well, we still go back, even though we're, socially distanced right now and in a pandemic, communications really hasn't changed that much. So we look for students who are good journalists. So having writing skills, knowing how to tell a story, what makes a story, what is interesting, where's that edge. So thinking strategically makes a big difference. We look at people who have the gift of gab. That can be developed, but if you have that natural gift of being able to relate to people, that's important as well. And I tell folks with public relations, you're talking to people, like I mentioned earlier, didn't realize the benefit of that customer service job when I was first starting out, seeing an issue, helping people solve it, and then moving forward. You have to be able to forecast. People have issues, they have problems. Companies are looking at issues, students are looking at issues, student athletes, sports. So you have to be able to forecast. And what I mean by that is saying, okay, here's your issue. If you do this, this is going to happen down the road. If you do this, this is going to happen down the road. And being able to forecast so people can see the effects of their behavior and what they're trying to do. So again, I think when you put all of that together, and then eventually over years, the confidence builds, that's important as well. But those are the main skill sets, that I think that you really need to make an impact in this industry.
At an organization like the NCAA, you have diverse stakeholders from the public at large to corporate champions, your student athletes, and then member institutions. How
Mhm.
do you approach developing communication strategies with such a diverse group of stakeholders?
Well, you look at the diverse audiences, and I tell people you have to know your audience. You have to know your audience. And even though we may all resemble each other, there are still differences there. So, are we talking about Black females? Are we talking about people of color under the age of 20? Are we talking about parents, older individuals? So again, you have to know your audience. And then from there, you start to develop what the message is that you want them to know. And that's the piece of public relations. What am I communicating in order to get you to move or behave in a certain way, whether that's, okay, I want you to go out and buy tickets. I want you to support an initiative, or I want you to move in this direction. So again, strategically thinking about who your audience is, what your main goals are, and then from there, you develop your objectives and how you're going to get to the goal. And then from the objectives, you look at your tactics, and your tactics are your actions, What makes people move? Am I going to host a dinner, or am I going to host a webinar or a podcast in order to get people more engaged or to give them the information that I want them to have? So again, I think once you know your audiences, that's what really makes the difference. And I've just had the benefit of being able to ebb and flow with different groups and different audiences, and you talk to people. You find out what they're about, what needs do they have, what are they trying to do. So I think all of that, you put it together and wrap it up real nice, and that helps you get to that end goal of success. Yeah.
And how do you define public relations?
Well, again, it is communicating to a particular audience in order to get them to move or behave in a certain way. And I know that sounds, pretty complex, but again, you're usually looking at some sort of issue. So when people come to agencies, PR agencies, they're usually coming to them because they want something. They want people to support their event. They want people to understand who they are or what they are. So they don't have the visibility that they want. Another example, they, may want people to engage with them somehow. You look at advocacy groups, and things along that line. So, there may be a product that they want to push to a particular audience in a particular way through press releases. Again, we talked about the importance of social media. So yeah, that's the wonderful world of public relations, the measurement of things. So it sounds a lot like the marketing end. We're not really selling, but again, we're looking more at the messaging, the communications, and the behavior of people with particular audiences, not necessarily sales, but more of an information stream. So, yeah.
Thank you for explaining that. I think it's really important for our audience to understand how public relations is defined, because a lot of students now, Gail, since they're growing up with social media, they have a very myopic view of
Right.
what public relations is. And they think it is using one tool to get out a message. But as you said, public relations is much deeper than that. So what they think is public relations is actually a tactic of
Right.
public relations.
Right. And that's what I tell students. I tell them, public relations is not bad. Sometimes it's used, the word is used in a bad way. People say, oh, well, that's just PR over there. PR is very important. And I tell students, the tactic is your action. That's your action. Your objective is how you're going to get to the goal. The tactic is how you're going to get to the objective. So it's almost like a pyramid that you're looking at. And, at the very end, and sometimes along the way of the campaign, but usually at the very end, there's got to be that measurement. Did you hit the mark? Was it successful? Did you get there? So again, through communications, you can communicate with numerous platforms, but you have to be strategic, and you have to look at who you're communicating to. And a lot of times people don't do that. They come up with a PR plan and they just want to throw it out there, for everybody. And, very few times does that work. You typically will have to narrow in on your audience. And that's the beauty of, public relations. It can be proactive in trying to push something, give people information, get it out there. And it can be reactive as well in answering. Something has happened, so now I have to communicate what I want you to know, or I have to educate you in what I want you to know. So it can be proactive, same thing, or it can be reactive. And I call it the power to the push. Everybody has to be involved in it and moving in that same direction. So yeah, that's the funny thing about PR. If you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different answers.
And as a PR pro, I am sure that the answer will change based on the audience as well. How you would explain it to a class of 10-year-olds will be different than to a class of, seniors in college.
That's right. Yeah.
So Gail, that's the beauty of PR. What about the challenges of working in PR?
Well, it's just like any other industry. Sometimes you develop that message and you put that message out there, and you might be directing it many times toward media, and it gets taken in a totally different direction. So, that's a challenge, because you're using a platform. Sometimes you also have to rely on others with media, and that's the tricky piece about it. The media communicate to the public, so they are still an important piece to that puzzle. But something that we thought about at NCAA several years ago is we recognize that the media, yes, they're still important. They still have a huge platform. But again, with digital, we have our own platform too. And I think that's a key thing for people to realize. Yes, you can rely on media. Many people do. But what sort of platforms do you have? And that's where the websites come into play. And we looked at things very differently several years ago, and it's changed the path that we're taking right now. We realize that we don't have to rely on media. Again, we know that they're important and we still communicate with them. They're a key audience, but we have a platform. We have a website. People, when they want information, what do? You get online, you'll Google it, you'll go to the search engine, you'll look for a website. So that's where people can have a lot of their key message points. Now, again, the rise of Twitter, of Instagram, of other platforms to communicate is key. But people, when you have that website, that's where you can really control who you are, what you want people to know about you, and whatever the message is that you want people to know, how you develop it. Because as we've said, if you don't tell your own story, somebody's going to tell it for you, and you may not like the way that they tell it. So yeah, you have to push your own messages out there. But again, going back to your question, the challenges, sometimes people get it and sometimes they don't, but you have to take things more in control to control what you want people to understand about you.
Yes, it is really important. I love that you said, tell your story.
Tell your story.
Someone else tells it and you don't like it.
That's right. That's right. And many people, unfortunately, have fallen prey to that. So it doesn't take very long for something to spin out of control. And yet it takes what feels like forever to try and get your arms back around it.
Yeah, to take the reins back.
It takes take the reins back.
You spoke about relying on media to get your message out.
Mm-hmm.
And I am curious about how you find that balance between working with media to help you get messages out, but also there are times where you have to keep media at bay because they are digging for information that you're not ever going to share or that you're not sharing at that time. How do you strike that balance with what I refer to media as frenemies?
Frenemies. Well, you have to understand, that's key right there. They're not your friend, but many times they're not your enemy either. Some of them may be, but I think the key thing is you have to build relationships. And that doesn't happen overnight, but you have to build good professional working relationships. You may have a very small group that you can do that with. You try to broaden it out, and it may be, at an event where, you sit down and you talk with a media person, maybe who's emailed you before to get more of an idea about who they are and what their beat is, because many times they will have an angle that they keep on, whether it's investigative or feature human interest. So it's about building relationships, number one, but then you also have to realize they have a job to do. So, you have to keep it professional, knowing that they're looking for information. You have information that you're trying to get out. And it's, the coming together of the two to get what you want out, as well as to help them do their jobs. So again, it's really about developing relationships. Some people are easier than others to do that with. Some people, are just the ones who, okay, they come to you, The story's already written, so it already has an angle, and they're just looking for a quote. So as you go through your career, you learn how to figure out what is and what isn't. And that's the key piece of, the challenges, because there are always going to be challenges. Sometimes you can do a backgrounder with media. So in other words, I don't want you to quote me, but I'm going to give you a little more detail to help you get the accurate story. Sometimes you might do an exclusive where you're giving them specific information and it's only going to them or their outlet. Many times that is built on either a relationship, professional relationship you have with the outlet, or it might be the range of exposure that they have. We've done exclusives with the Associated Press. Associated Press is national, it's global. So again, you have to look at what you want that end game to look like. Is this something that, you want to get in local media and you want to take care of the local newspaper, make sure they get what they need? Or is this something that is really major to where you want as many eyes as possible on it? And that's where your AP, your USA Today, and some of the larger New York Times, Washington Post, where they come into scenarios like that. So again, there can be, challenging situations, but you have to know how to handle it in order to get to the end result that you want.
Yeah. So much more that we could talk about, Gail, but I do want to spend some time just chatting about the NCAA. You were at the U.S. Olympic Committee prior to joining the team at the NCAA. What was attractive about the NCAA?
Well, from a personal standpoint, I was living in Colorado and I'm from Kentucky, and I wanted to get a little bit closer to home. And Indianapolis is a much shorter drive than Colorado Springs was. So I started looking at what might get me a little bit closer to my home region. And I can remember that I was sitting in our press office in Sydney, Australia, when I was doing the Olympic Games, when Sydney was hosting. And we had one of our press officers who was sitting in the office that morning too. And we were just sitting there, we were chatting right before everything was to get started for that day. And he was talking about, it was a former NCAA staff member, and he was talking about some opportunities that the NCAA was going to create around public relations. They had looked at always being sort of a reactive type of organization, and they were starting to look a little bit more on, okay, what can we do proactively? And NCAA has always looked upon certainly championships, but more of an enforcement, because we do policy, we do, enforcement, regulations, rules and regulations. But they were also looking at it from the standpoint of there are many other things that people don't know about NCAA. So he said they were going to have some positions opening, and would I be interested? And I knew that they were in Indianapolis, had just gotten there, I think, had just gotten to Indianapolis. And I said, yeah, I would really be interested in what's coming down the pipeline, and again, continue to network with him. And one thing led to another, came in and interviewed and got the position. So yeah, he was very very beneficial. Yeah, to helping me with that. And he's now at the college football playoffs and is leading that, Bill Hancock. So yeah, kudos to him for us having that chat and just opening again my eyes to some different things that were happening. So yeah, I've been very fortunate to have been in the right place at the right time, just good blessings and good people being around them. So yeah, it does make a difference. Yeah.
So will this be your 20th Final Four?
Actually, it will be, I've been there a little over 19 years. So I'm almost up to 2-0, almost, but not my 20th Final Four. Yeah, I attended some Final Fours when I was at Kentucky, was working there. Their men's team got to a couple of Final Fours while I was there, and actually won one of them. And then, since I've been at the national office, I've been able to attend Final Four games and other championships too. So yeah, it's really interesting. It's fun. There's a lot of work, a lot of things that people don't see behind the scenes and pulling things together. But we have a good team, a good base of individuals that I get to work with. So yeah, very fortunate.
Well, I think the world of you and your team. I really enjoyed working with you all. I learned so much. As you said, so much goes into a championship. We have to have another conversation, you all, for her to explain what goes on a championship. I mean, the decor, the details, and the signage, the communications. I mean, my office for Final Four was filled with binders on Final Four and NCAA communications, style guide, and branding.
Yes.
So much goes into it. And you have to be prepared for not being prepared. Because one, it's a tournament. You do not know who's going to win each week. You have no idea who's going to be in your venue for Final Four. So you have to be, like I said, prepared for the unprepared. And one of the things that I enjoyed about you and admired greatly, Gail, was just your ability to remain calm and poised as we are dealing with changes on a daily basis. As you recall, in Detroit, there was a lot going on, from the mayoral scandal to the build out. It was the first Final Four where we had the court at the 50-yard line. For those of you who don't know, prior to that, the Final Four was always in a football stadium, but it was built in the end zone of football stadiums. And Detroit 2009 Final Four was the first one that was built at the 50-yard line so that more fans could experience it. And we definitely, when you're the first, there are always going to be some key learnings. And it was nice to have Gail and other colleagues who were, calm and in the trenches with me on that.
Well, you did a great job, and you are doing fabulous right now. I love this, SHEMAKERS and everything that you're doing. And again, you're right. Going back so many years and just looking at the newness of what you were talking about, new concepts to where we are right now. And I think it snowed. I think we caught a little bit of snow at that Final Four too. That was interesting. I can remember walking to the convention center and just a lot of different things. So, one benefit though, it wasn't that far. We were still based here in Indianapolis, so it was one where we could drive their staff members, and we love it when we can get to a Final Four in our cars, because it just means, a lot of staff and people in the area, they can drive to it and they can enjoy it as well. So I think we had a number of staff members who probably came to that Final Four as well. But you've done a great job, and you are a role model as well. So keep up the great work. It's really going well.
Thank you so much, Gail. I really appreciate that. So we talked about that one change with Final Four. How has the organization evolved in other ways since you joined the team?
Well, I would say I was doing some work today, looking at some different things. The evolution of what has become a hot topic right now, diversity and inclusion. And we have had a diversity and inclusion office probably for a little over 15 years, somewhere in through there. It's been a while, but now people are having discussions. Now it is a hot topic. And it's a topic where our Office of Inclusion is getting a lot of good attention. Attention from student athletes, from administrators, from coaches, in how to have some of these hard conversations. And what's going on in the country right now, what's happening globally. And, I'm so glad looking at the evolution from when that department first started. And I was at the national office, and that's one of the areas that I work with primarily. So I can see the evolution of when it first started, and people were thinking, diversity, yeah, we know that, but what's this inclusion thing that you're now people are beginning to understand it. And the upside is there's more discussion around it, and people are trying to understand it, trying to. There's more education around it. The downside is that, it's been around for a long time. And people who look like us, we've known it. We've been talking about it. We've known this for a long time. The unfortunate piece is looking at what's happened in the last year around the murders. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, to get people to focus on it. And it has come into sports as well. So, it's unfortunate that, we had to lose lives to really get people to look at the importance of social justice, of the ugliness of racism, and the importance of diversity and inclusion. Because ultimately, when you have more diverse minds at the table, you get a better product in the long run. So, it's interesting to look at our Office of Inclusion and how it's evolved and the areas of focus. They're focusing on a lot of topics that you hear about, but you just don't think about necessarily in sports. They have 5 key areas. They focus on race, gender, LGBTQ, student athletes with disabilities, and then international student athletes. So, when you look at those 5 areas and then realize that there are probably some other areas that you could bring in there too, religion, geographical areas, and the diversity of the mindsets and different, there are a number of different things that are being discussed now, but I'm glad to see the evolution to where now we're having these conversations and somebody's not looking at you with a side eye when you bring up some of these topics, So, yeah, I think, that's just one example of how some things have evolved. We're starting to see, people of color at the table and getting positions. You look at athletics. 5 years ago, people weren't talking about chief diversity officers in athletics. You know, really in the university system. If you go back, it might have been called something different, you know, might have been a different look. But now we're talking about inclusion. And that's the key piece. So when you talk about evolution, that's probably the biggest piece because it encompasses so much right there.
I read an article that you wrote for PRSA, and you discussed how public relations professionals have an opportunity to really contribute to diversity and inclusion, because in the communication, you're helping to just shape minds and inform people. In that, you talked about how public relations professionals can make a change by tightening up their game plan. What did you mean when you said tighten up the game plan? And have you seen public relations professionals accomplish that in the last 6 years?
You know, I have seen them tighten up their game plan, and it can be defined in a number of different ways. As we talked about tonight, what's your message? You know, developing your message. What do you want people to know? Instead of just throwing everything out there to them, tighten it up. What is your message? What is it that you're trying to relay? So something along that line. I think we're getting better in public relations because there's so much competition. There's so many distractions right now. And again, you know, you can just look at social media. Everybody's everywhere. So you have to really have a tight game plan, a tight model in order to get people's attention. So again, you have to be very specific. You have to be concise. You have to be consistent again, and folks don't always understand that. In getting out what you want. Because again, I've got choices today. You know, I can be over here listening to this person. I can be on this medium. I can, you know, be doing this, that, the other. I think people really have to tighten up their game, or else they're just going to be floating out there. So again, you know, what is your message? How specific are you getting in terms of pitching? That could be pitching a story. What's your audience? What's your message? What's your timeline? You know, are you doing it forever? Or, you know, do you have a plan? And that really helps you tighten up your game if you've got a plan. And that can be a career plan, that can be a product plan, that can be an individual plan. What is your plan? So yeah.
Thank you. This has been a really great evening for me. I love catching up with you. I learned so much as well. And I know that our audience has enjoyed this. So thank you so much. Before I let you go, though, I have 3 fun sentences for you to complete.
Okay. Uh-oh.
So the first one is, the first editor I ever pitched to is now saying this about me.
Oh, wow. And I have to fill that in?
Yes.
Ooh, my goodness. Oh, that could be a number of different things, Shivani. That could be a number. I would say she is doing exactly what we would expect her to do in pitching a story. Again, she's got a plan. She knows what the end game looks like, and that's what she's going toward.
Very
That's
good.
what I hope. That's what I hope.
I'm sure they are.
I don't know. I still deal with media. So again, talking about relationships, I'm hoping it was a good relationship. I can remember back who I was pitching things to. So hopefully it is. Yeah.
We'll send them this clip. The second one is, I know I have made it when I'm sitting down on this show. Now, you've already been on SHEMAKERS, you know, in the first season of SHEMAKERS. So outside of SHEMAKERS, that is, you know you've made it when you're on this show.
Ooh, I would say I know I have made it when I've done a TED Talks. I know I've definitely made it.
I can't.
And hopefully made it for the good. And I'm not here talking about something bad.
Yes, I'm here for your TED Talk.
That's right.
Okay, and the final one is, you can catch me jamming and karaokeing to this song in my car.
Oh, gosh, I have so many. I would have to say, I was kind of moving back and forth to the song that I heard you playing with Beyonce.
Oh, Run the World.
Run the World, Girls.
Yes.
I like it. And
That is a good one.
yeah.
Yes.
And I do have it in my playlist. I definitely have it in there. My music interests go from one end to the other. Trust me on that one. But I do have that one in my playlist. Yeah.
Good on karaoke too. Well, thank you again so much, Gail. It was very nice to see you. I'm going to be crossing my fingers for you to have both women's and men's Final Four this year. We're always rooting for you. I appreciate you sharing with SHEMAKERS and look forward to having you back. And I'm going to be on the lookout for that TED Talk.
That's okay. There we go. Like I said, I have enjoyed being here. Thank you very much for having me. You keep up the good work, and don't be a stranger. Come to Indianapolis. Come see us. We don't have to have a Final Four to get, together, but fingers crossed that, again, our student athletes, our coaches, our administrators come in to our Final Fours and all of our championships this year safely, and then return home safely. So you stay safe and healthy as well.
Thank you. I'll definitely have to take you up on getting to Indianapolis. It's been years since I hung out in the Circle City. I grew up in West Michigan, and my high school band, for a field trip, we went to the Circle City Classic and performed in that parade. Yes.
The Circle is still there. Come on.
Yes. Thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye. And thank you, SHEMAKERS, for watching this evening. I can't believe it, but we're already celebrating our first month. Yay! Why wait to celebrate when you have been doing something for a year? I hope that you all will take a moment and celebrate your small victories as well. What step did you take today? What lap did you finish? Drop us a line or share with us on social media. We want to celebrate with you. I also want to know how we can help you take the next step and finish your next lap. So what's next on SHEMAKERS? As we move out of African American History Month, we are going to be talking about women's accomplishments and celebrating the work that women have done, because March is Women's History Month. Next week on SHEMAKERS, Diana Ruiz, CEO of Women's Global Leadership Initiative, will be with us. So get your playbook notes out to be prepared to take notes on leadership, diversity, and inclusion and power of women's voices. Diana is the CEO and founder of Women's Global Leadership Initiative. Since 2008, Diana has served as a professional advisor for women's leadership and economic development in several communities throughout the United States, Latin America, the Balkan region, and Women in STEM Association in Tunisia and Turkey. Diana resides in San Francisco, where WGLI is headquartered. The daughter of pro-democracy Cuban revolutionaries, Diana continues to build on her family's legacy through believing in the possibility of a more just world. Diana received her BA in organizational behavior from the University of San Francisco and has worked for more than 20 years in finance, sales, mediation, and labor negotiation. Join us next week as we talk about women, the gender gap, and disparities that we are constantly working to tackle. Thank you again for joining us this evening. And remember, Wednesday night is not the only night that you can connect with Heels and Helmets. We are wherever you are. So please follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. That's our show for this week. Remember, ladies, you are a she-maker, already making big plays. And I am here to help you get in the end zone and win. Have a great night.